Welcome back to Management 2020. In this video, we'll look at nonverbal communication. So in this video, we'll try to define what nonverbal communication is, talk about different types or areas that we communicate nonverbally, and then give some strategies for effective communication with your nonverbal communication. So nonverbal communication in short could be described as communication without words, because verbal communication means using words, either in writing or in speaking. So there's many aspects of nonverbal communication. But some of the things to keep in mind about nonverbal communication is it is contextual. So even though most people, I would say all people perhaps, communicate nonverbally, the way that they communicate isn't necessarily uniform. And so sometimes we need contextual clues about the environment we're in, the culture we're in, and the audience that we're working with in order to understand that nonverbal communication. It's also important to understand that sometimes nonverbal communication is intentional, but sometimes it's unintentional. People don't recognize that they're communicating nonverbally and what that might communicate to their audience. Ideally, nonverbal communication is complementary with our verbal communication. It helps support and reinforce the messages that we want to share with our words. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's contradictory. We're saying something with our words, but our body language or other nonverbal avenues of communication are saying something that contradicts the message that we're trying to share with our words. And so becoming more aware of nonverbal communication can help us use this tool effectively and avoid problems with it. So there are a variety of different types of nonverbal communication, and I encourage you to, next time you are maybe in a meeting or in a classroom, or even just on a one-on-one interpersonal exchange with a friend or family member, look for some of these signs of nonverbal communication. The space that we use, and how large is the space, and what does the space look like? Also looking at the time. Um, do we use pausing when we communicate with others, or do we speak very quickly? And then the movement. How close are we to the audience? Do we stay in one place, or do we move around as we speak or we communicate? That closeness, that proximity, but also the movement. And our appearance, right? The way that we present ourselves with clothing and grooming, that can impact our message in ways that we may intend, but also in maybe some ways that we don't intend. I can remember watching a TED Talk a few years back with my students, and although I really enjoyed the content of the TED Talk, and the speaker spoke very clearly, um, the speaker was wearing unusual clothing that had nothing to do with the topic, but was not a regular business attire. And it was fairly distracting for both me and the students that we had a hard time focusing on the presentation because the clothing just really drew our attention. Paralanguage. And so paralanguage talks about factors beyond um, maybe the words of our language. So this can include things like uh, pitch and speed of which we communicate. It can also be things like filler language and size and other kinds of non-word communication that's part of our language. And then also the environment where we present our messages, the temperature of the environment, and what's decorated in the environment. Are there props? Is there background? Are there visuals? All of these things can contribute to the message that we share, whether we intend to or not. So, some strategies for having more effective nonverbal communication would start with observing others and taking a look at their nonverbal communication. How do they sit when they listen? How do they sit when they speak? How do they move their hands? What do they do with their eyes? Are they using eye contact or not? Um, do they move around when they speak? Um, all of these things can help you better notice how nonverbal communication impacts how you receive the message. And then the same way, consider your own use of nonverbal communication. Maybe invite someone to observe you or record yourself in a realistic situation so that you can, instead of focusing on delivering your message, you can focus on how you delivered your message. And what are the factors surrounding that message that may positively contribute to your message, but might also undermine your message? And then as you identify areas for improvement, then focusing on just one aspect of nonverbal communication at a time that you want to improve. A few years back, I gave a TEDx talk on campus, and as part of that, I visited the public speaking center on campus and had an opportunity to be recorded and then could go back and review my recording with a worker from the public speaking center. And what I discovered is I used a lot of filler, a lot of ums that broke up my presentation and made it sound less professional. And so by being aware of that, as I practiced my presentation, and I never memorized it, but I memorized the topics that I wanted to discuss. And the more I practiced, the more I could feel confident in sharing that message without having to use so much filler. And I can't say that I have eliminated filler from my speech, but I know when I want to give a more professional presentation, if I more carefully practice and think about what I want to say, then I can communicate that message with far less filler than I used to. And so my presentations come across as more professional, more confident, and more prepared. So in this video, we've tried to define what nonverbal communication is, talked about different things that contribute to nonverbal communication, and then offered some suggestions for how we can become more aware of our nonverbal communication, of the nonverbal communication of others that we interact with, and then how we can take steps to improving and refining the way that we use nonverbal communication.